Happy New Year and welcome to the IDP Plus Advice Show for Week 18. While I'm not a big fan of Week 18 fantasy championships, here to try and help you out. We're going to talk as we do every week about snaps and playing time for IDP. We talk about alignment, injuries, waivers, players to pick up. We're going to throw in some dynasty tidbits. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. Alrighty, I hope everybody did have a Merry Christmas / Happy Holidays. And I'm filming this on the December 31st, getting close to midnight here, but want to have this ready for you all as you get ready for your Week 18 championships for those that have it, but also some that may be dynasty looking ahead and starting to prepare for the off season as well. So look, I do want to begin by apologizing also for missing the Start Sit show this past Sunday. I know Michael and Sean did a fantastic job in my absence. In-laws got ill, had to drive to Louisiana to check on them. So apologies for the last minute not being able to be there, but hope Michael and Sean took care of y'all and help you to move on and win your championships. As always, I ask that you please leave your comments, give some thumbs up if you like it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed yet. That's very much appreciated. And with that, as we do every week, we're going to go division by division, which will allow you to jump around if you're looking for certain teams. And we're going to start with the NFC North, as we always do. And we're going to start with the Chicago Bears. So here we go. Of course, the Bears played the Seahawks in what was a dreadful offensive game. And as a result of that, both teams were so bad. There was low snap counts on both sides, including the Bears only playing 52 snaps on defense. I guess that bad Seattle just played horrible, but they did win. Leading tacklers topped out at 6 combined tackles across T.J. Edwards, Edmonds, and Kyler Gordon. So not the kind of, you're not going to get the kind of IDP stats you want when your team's only playing 52 snaps on defense versus that average of around 65-ish that we're looking for. The edge defensive end story was interesting when I started looking at the snap count percents, though, for you all. Montez Sweat, who is typically in the low, maybe mid 60s, was all the way down to 48%. DeMarcus Walker, who's been in the low 60s to actually mid 70s, anywhere in that range from like 661 up into like 72, 73, he was down at 42%. Now, Sweat did get a sack when Geno Smith got tripped by one of his offensive linemen. It was a really cheap sack, but he did get a sack. But it wasn't exactly like he dominated the lineman, whatever. But anyway, the rest of the edge players, Jake Martin and Darrell Taylor went up from the low 30s to the low 40s. Daniel Hardy went from 3 to 19%. Dominique Robinson went down from 22 to 12%. Austin Booker, 14%. He went up to 21%. So huge rotation. The top players, Walker and Sweat, coming down, others moving up. This has me very concerned for Montez Sweat next year, with the caveat that there'll probably be a new coaching staff and they're paying him a lot of money, but it's something we need to watch. Maybe they just weren't happy with him and Walker's productivity. Okay. Gervin Dexter returned from the injury list, played 56% of the snaps. Chris Williams, who I talked about briefly last week, there was the second defensive tackle in terms of snaps with 46%. Yeah, I know they have Zach Pickens, the other rookie, not rookie, but second-year player drafted the same draft as Gervin Dexter, excuse me. They have Andrew Billings, but Chris Williams, there's something about when I watch him, he's pretty active. On the safety side of things, Elijah Hicks was inactive due to injury once again. Jonathan Owens played 100% as a result of that. Kevin Byard and Owens each had a combined 4 tackles. Not very good. So that lack of playing time really hurt the stats for these guys. Moving on to the Lions versus the 49ers in what was pretty exciting Monday night game. Let's talk about linebackers because it's always interesting to see what the Lions do, okay, with all the injuries they've had. Well, Jack Campbell played 100% of the snaps. They played 65 snaps in total, so right on average. Campbell had 9 combined tackles, led the team, so that's about roughly what you would expect for Jack Campbell on an average number of snaps. Trevor Nowitzki was second on the team with 66% of the snaps at linebacker. Um, the week before was 38%. Then he was inactive. The previous week to that was 64%. So he's been bouncing all over the place. But he's apparently the number 2 linebacker, with the caveat that Jalen Reeves-Maben, first week off of IR, activated from the 21-day practice window. He actually played 62% of the snaps. Only had 2 solo tackles, though not very efficient for all those snaps. Reeves-Maben may end up jumping Nowaski for the second most linebacker snaps when we look at that big game they have against the Vikings next week. Ben Neiman played 28%, Zeke Turner played 9%, Anthony Pittman 6%, Jamal Adams 0%. Quan Alexander was released and re-signed to their practice squad. David Long was completely released, claimed by Tennessee. As a side note, failed the physical there and now is a complete free agent at this point in time. So that's the Lions linebacker core, and the net of all that is you're playing Campbell, but you're not expecting a linebacker 1 and linebacker 2 type of stats. Maybe as a linebacker 3, you're potentially playing him. I say that with this other caveat about a lot of teams may rest linebackers who have just bumps and bruises when they would normally play going in because of week 18 and them not having anything to play for. Something you have to watch throughout the week as watching those injury reports, who's being ruled out, etc. Amik Robinson and Terrion Arnold played the majority of the snaps at cornerback on the outside. Melifonwu, and I don't want to butcher his first name, starts with I. Okay, I'll try. Ifiatu Melifonwu played only 59% of the snaps this week after playing 80% the week before. Now, it was interesting, he did play 58% of the snaps he did play in the box/slot role. The week before that, it was roughly 69%, so down a little bit. So I did a little bit more digging. So why was that the case? Well, we looked up Brian Branch here, and what we saw Brian Branch did is that he was, the last 2 weeks in particular, he's been used much, much more in the slot. I put that in caps on my show notes as I was getting ready. So that was the emphasis, reason for the emphasis there. And he also had a deep reduction in a big reduction in playing in deep safety as well. This week, for perspective, I'll give you the last few weeks. This week, 5% deep are at wide corner, 95% close to the line, slot, box, or D line, okay? Last week, 8% deep, 92% close to line, all right? 2 weeks ago, 37% deep or wide corner, with 27% of that in the slot. So in the slot, for perspective, it was 57% this week of that closer to the line percentage, 75% last week. The previous week, only 27% of the slot. So when I say closer to the line, remember that includes slot, that includes being in the box at a linebacker and being along the D line, just as a reminder, okay? So that's the differential. Bottom line, he's played a lot more slot and a lot more closer to the line the past 2 weeks because of all the injuries they've had at cornerback. And with Melifonwu coming back from injured reserve, that's helped as well, okay? Kirby Joseph, of course, had 2 big picks and all in this game, which in big play scoring certainly helped you out. Okay, let's go to the Packers. The Packers played a whopping 73 snaps on defense against the Vikings. I say whopping, that we'll have some bigger whoppers as we get into the show in terms of snaps played. They had inactive Jair Alexander. They had inactive Evan Williams, so 2 of their starters in the secondary. Quay Walker, who's typically their green dot Mike linebacker, was also inactive. So what did that mean for the team? Eric Wilson once again replaced Quay Walker and played 100% of the snaps. He had 9 combined tackles, kind of a little bit on the weaker side considering they played 73 snaps, but 9 didn't kill you if you played him. Edgerrin Cooper played a season high, career high, 99% of the snaps. So finally, the transition has occurred to where he is the number 2 linebacker. He'll be next to Quay Walker. And of course, he was running all over the field. He tied for the team lead with 11 combined tackles and 4 tackles for loss. He motors around the field. Now, Troy Aikman did make some, was it Aikman? I'm sorry, whoever was the analyst for that game. It wasn't Aikman I forgot who it was, but anyway, they commented on how while he was running around the field, he was sometimes missing assignments, but he must be improving on those assignments to the fact that they played him now 99% of the time. Isaiah McDuffie, in case you're wondering, only played 40% of the snaps, so he's clearly slipped into that number 3 linebacker role. At the safety position, Xavier McKinney played 100% of the snaps. Javon Bullard played 94% of the snaps. Now, what was interesting is Bullard, looking up his stats, he played 49% deep, 50% in the box/slot. He ended up having one slot actually at wide corner. That was probably in a man-to-man situation when his man started inside and then went out wide. He tied for the team lead with an 11 combined tackles, which is pretty good considering he played about 50% of his snaps deep. So very productive, but that's usually an outlier situation when that happens. Zane Anderson, as a side note, left with a concussion, as did Devontae Wyatt. Zane played 15% of snaps before he left. 73% of that 15% was deep. So basically, he played 11 snaps, 8 were deep. So when Zane's in there, that's how you could see how he was going to be used. He was probably going to play more of that Evan Williams role, with Evan Williams being out, but the concussion pushed him out, put him out of the game, and forced them to move Bullard around. Is what basically happened. The Vikings in that same game against the Packers only played 63 snaps on defense. Blake Cashman, 100%, led the team with 11 combined tackles and 1.5 sacks. We recommended Cashman in this show last week. I heard also Michael and Sean, I got to listen to a replay of them, recommending Cashman very strongly as well, and hopefully you took that advice and played him. Ivan Pace was activated from IR, but I've been cautioning throughout the year, and it was very similar again this week that he only played 33% of the snaps, only had 3 assisted tackles. Usually, even with 33% of the snaps, he's hyper efficient from a tackling perspective. Did not happen this past week. Now, Patrick Jones injured his knee and only played 13% of the snaps off the edge. Thus, Dallas Turner jumped up from 23% that he played the week before up to 40%. Now, Turner's snap counts have been like a yo-yo as well, or up and down is probably a better way of saying that. So in perspective, 40% this week, then 23%, then 49, then 35, and 32 if you're working backwards. So he's been up and down a little bit. Now, he did have one play. He got 1 sack. And so when you get 1 sack, for those of you that have been listening and kind of learning about IDP, if you have 1 sack, that means you got 1 tackle, 1 solo tackle, 1 sack, 1 quarterback hit, 1 tackle for loss. Okay, so he got ones across the board. So that 1 play gave him all those stats. Okay. At the safety position, Harrison Smith, 100% of the snaps, 4 combined tackles, 58% deep. Cam Bynum, 94% of the snaps, 4 combined tackles, 64% deep. Not good for either Smith or Bynum playing deep that much. Josh Metellus, okay, 76% of the snaps is all he played, attributing part of that to the return of Ivan Pace. He had 3 combined tackles. He only played 4% of his snaps deep, but if he's only going to play 76%, remember earlier this year I was talking about the fact that Bynum has been playing that deep role. Metellus was playing closer to the line, but Bynum and Metellus were both playing between 80 and 90% of the snaps a lot, particularly when Pace was active. Now that Pace was active, there's that risk of that happening again. Week 18, they're both risky plays because of the potential lack of volume. As we're going to go ahead and switch now to the NFC East, as we're doing that, I just want to put a shout out for IDP Plus, and we have the 20% off promo code with props, so you can still use that to become a member. And with that, you get access to our articles, you get access to our rankings, which is both our weekly rankings as well as our dynasty rankings, which we're in the process of updating right now as a side note. That's for offensive players and individual defensive players. We have some great tools, a lot of the snap count stuff that I talk about, which I'm sharing a lot of to entice you all to be able to join and actually use it yourself. We have an injury report tracker, fantasy points allowed by position for offense and IDP, weekly fantasy finishes by position for offense and IDP, And of course, we have our YouTube channel. So please join and become part of the family. With that, now let's go to the NFC East and talk about the Commanders in that really exciting game against the Falcons. Uh, the Commanders played 64 snaps on defense. First thing to call out, Jonathan Allen did return from IR. He didn't play his normal number of snaps that he did before injury. He only played 42% of the snaps in his first game back. Of course, when he was playing earlier this year, Johnny Newton was working his way back from those foot surgeries and foot injuries. He is now, he normally plays in the mid 50s. He was down to 47%. So this Allen coming back could create a little bit of a rotation, particularly for this Week 18 game with Allen and Newton. Deron Payne was down a little bit. He was down about 75%. He had been in the high 70s, a little bit low 80s kind of thing. So you could see a three-person rotation. You're probably not relying on any of these guys in your fantasy football championship, but I just want to wanted you to be aware if you're in deep leagues where you're forced to play one of these folks. At the linebacker position, yes, Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louvu both played 100% of the snaps. Wagner only had 6 assisted tackles, no solos. Now, remember, Wagner's 35 years old, folks, and he is a free agent. He only signed a one-year deal. I promised some dynasty tidbits. Jordan McGee, who was a fifth-round pick, who they spoke very, very highly of in the preseason, but he's had some injury problems during the regular season. He's been playing with special teams some. He might be someone in deeper leagues to stash on the end of your bench before we head to the offseason, before you might have to deal with him in free agency later on, just in case Wagner retires or they decide not to re-sign him. Frankie Louvu had only 1 assisted tackle. That means he has basically pooped the bed for us Louvu owners in 2 of the last 3 weeks really badly. Um, haven't seen that they're using him that drastically different. Just haven't gotten the productivity. So anyway, and a lot of that came from the big plays and the sacks in particular, and just not delivering. That was the risk with Louvu. We knew it when he signed with Washington this year, that he could be used in a little bit of a Micah Parsons type role. So not necessarily always in the box, but on the edge, et cetera. And so Louvu, it's really hurt us late this year. Jeremy Chin, 31% of his snaps were deep, in case you're wondering. Only 5 combined tackles. Marshawn Lattimore missed the game because of an injury. Michael Davis started instead of Benjamin St-Juste. And of course, one of the things we loved about St-Juste is he was just good enough to get on the field, which means he got targeted a lot and he had a bunch of tackles. Well, Davis played about, it was in the 70%, 73% range. I forgot to mark that down. He did get hurt for part of the game, and St-Juste came in his place. But when Davis was better, he went back in. But he was like burnt toast. He was burned so badly with Michael Davis. They're going to have to fix that next year. Mike Sainristil continued to play majority of his snaps on the outside. Quan Martin led with 8 combined tackles, and he also got an interception along with an extra pass defense, so 2 pass defenses total. That's a fluke outlier game when you are playing that deep, that many snaps, and that you have 8 combined tackles. Don't count on that going forward, everybody. Okay. Let's go to the Cowboys versus Eagles. They played 66 snaps on defense. Eric Kendricks was active and played 100% and had a close to typical Eric Kendricks line. Instead of 10 combined tackles, he only had 9, but he did have a tackle for loss. Maris Luafau, very disappointing in that he played 95% of the snaps, but only had 4 tackles, 3 of which were solo. One of the things he does try to make big plays and force fumbles and things along those lines, but boy, the tackle count surely wasn't there. I was very disappointed from a tackle count perspective. In case you're wondering, Nick Vigil played 1 snap. Devon Clark played 2 snaps. You don't want any of these guys, either one of those guys in your dynasty league. Hard for me to say for my LSU guy, Devon Clark. Micah Parsons played 71% of the snaps. Golston played 85%. Parsons did get a quarterback hit, though unfortunately no sack. Golston continues to be productive from a tackle floor perspective. This week it was 4 tackles. He also got a pass defense, so he's been in that 4 to 5 tackle range. Nothing sexy about that, but continues to have that floor if you need someone. Donovan Wilson, if you're watching the game, but in case you weren't, left with an injury, so he only played 69% of the snaps. I couldn't say very nice 69 since he got hurt. Wanye Thomas played 28% in his absence. Now, you may recall Wanye Thomas was carted off a few weeks ago, and it was thought that he was going to be out for the year. He was not. He missed a couple of weeks of practice. Practice again, was active, and he was the backup for Donovan Wilson. So if you're in a deep league, you're desperate because of injuries, players not playing. Wanye Thomas, if Donovan Wilson is out, mm, a, a safety 3, low end 3, high end 4 for Thomas. Um, and speaking of people that got burnt, not only did Michael Davis get burnt, as we talked about earlier, but Andrew Booth, oh my gosh, another burnt toast situation. He got torched, is probably a better way of saying it. Diggs was out. Uh, uh, Arun, whatever, Orun, the cornerback, who is a former Lion, he got hurt again, went back to IR. Keemon Hall was hurt. So they were forced to play Booth, and boy, it was bad. Okay. So if you might have liked a little bit of his stats that you saw, but stay away from that. Don't touch that, folks. The Giants versus the Colts. Huge upset. Colts laid a big fat egg, but we're talking about the Giants here first. They played a whopping 78 snaps on defense against the Colts. Micah McFadden was inactive. Darius Muasau moved into that role that previous Okereke, then McFadden. Now it's Muasau. He played 100% of the snaps. He only had 8 tackles through, which were solo. That's pretty weak considering 78 snaps and playing 100% of those. Not exactly exciting stats for the UCLA rookie. Ty Summers played 86% of the snaps. He had a career high and led the team with 11 tackles, but only 3 of which were solo, which means great. He was hustling and helping out, but didn't generate the stuff necessarily on his own. Some of you might have seen Isaiah Simmons chasing some receivers and ball carriers. He only played 12% of the snaps. Dane Belton continued to play in the Tyler Nubin role. Of course, Nubin went on IR with that ankle injury. Belton played 100% this week after only 90% last week and 100% the week before that. 8 tackles, which I believe was a career high for him. He also had 2 pass defenses and an interception. He played 42% of the snaps deep. So the last couple of weeks, he's played a little bit more deep than he did that first week when he took over for Nubin in the middle of the game. Jason Pinnock, who I've been pronouncing Pinnock, but apparently it's pronounced Pinnock. 94% of the snaps. He also had a career high of 10 tackles, 7 which were solo. He played 53% deep. So when the Giants played 78 snaps, it means the Colts were able to effectively move the ball enough, and it meant the safeties were up there having to make tackles because they were blowing through the front 7 of the Giants. Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau. Brian Burns did not get a sack, but he had a quarterback hit. Kayvon Thibodeau did have a sack, while Burns had 6 tackles. Thibodeau had 2 tackles. I mentioned it once earlier this year, but I think it's worth calling out. So here's another dynasty tidbit. If you are a Thibodeau owner, sell him while he's still got a good name and reputation. He's just, according to PFF, and as a reminder, and shout out to PFF, and as I was starting to say, a reminder, a lot of this positioning stats I do get from PFF in terms of linemen on the field. One of the things they do talk about and have stats on is pressure win rates, and Kayvon Thibodeau is pretty low in that. So a lot of the stats he had last year, he may have had more luck into being chased to him as opposed to him winning a lot. So I'd be looking to potentially trade Thibodeau. Okay, let's move to the Eagles. The Eagles played 62 snaps against the Cowboys. Now remember, this is a blowout game, so it had a big impact on snap percent, folks. Nakobe Dean didn't play because of an abdomen situation. They don't have anything to play for really in Week 18, so Nakobe Dean probably won't play again. It'll be interesting to see who does and who doesn't play for the Eagles. Orton Burke started in his place, but once again only played 82% of the snaps. Led the team in tackles with 8. Zach Bone only played 79% as a result. Jeremiah Trotter Jr., another 5th-round linebacker rookie, played 37% of the snaps because of the blowout. 3 tackles, one of which was solo, and got a half a sack. In deeper leagues, and you start looking at some of the players on your bench, taking a shot on a few of these fifth rounders and stashing them on your bench, as I mentioned earlier. Uh, uh, you know, here's another one like Jordan McGee with Jeremiah Trotter that you could potentially stash. Okay, because Zach Bowen is a free agent. He was only signed for 1 year, so that's something we need to watch for. And Oren Burks is a journeyman kind of player. Josh Sweat did play after leaving the last game with an injury, which was great, but he didn't play his normal complement of snaps because of the blowout. Jalix Hunt, who a couple of times I have shouted out on this show, played 50% of the snaps, had 6 tackles, 4 which were solo, and 1 tackle for a loss. He is someone to stash, folks. Keep on bringing that up. Okay, we're going to move to the NFC South next, but before we move to the NFC South, I do want to mention, I've mentioned a couple of times, I will be doing Dynasty content. I won't be starting next week though. So what I'll ask you to do is follow IDP Plus on X/Twitter. Also follow me at RickyRod66. And by the way, I forgot to mention that as I do at the beginning of every show. I am Ricky Rodrigue. You can find me at RickyRod66. Hopefully, most of you have been listening in and knew that, but just in case. So follow IDP Plus, follow at RickyRod66, and we'll be announcing when I'll be doing these shows. Of course, if you subscribe to the channel, sign up for alerts, you'll get some of those alerts as well. Okay? Let's go to the NFC South, as I mentioned earlier. Let's talk about the Bucks, who absolutely dismantled the Panthers. The Bucks only played 47 snaps. Folks, I didn't go back and look and do all the research, but that is absolutely one of the lowest snap counts for any defense in any game this year. So what does that mean? You're not going to have a lot of IDP counting stats. In fact, Zion McCollum, the cornerback, led the team with 6 combined tackles. No one else on the team had more than 3 combined tackles. Now, I think most people have learned, but just in case, when I use the term combined tackles, which I've been using previously, that means a combination of solo tackles and assisted tackles. So if I say something like 6 combined, 4 of which were solo, that means 4 solo tackles, 2 assisted tackles for 6 combined tackles. Just a little bit more education for those that weren't familiar with that. Okay, back to the Bucks. No one with more than 3 combined tackles, as I mentioned. At least Kalijah Kancey, Yaya Diaby, and even Anthony Nelson, who I know at least one person had to play in a very deep league as his edge person. At least all 3 of those folks got a sack. Antoine Winfield was out. Christian Izien was put on injured reserve. Jordan Whitehead returned, played 100% of the snaps, returned from injured reserve, that is to be more specific. He played 51% of those snaps deep. Ugh. You would hope for a little bit less than that for sure. Mike Edwards played 63% of the snaps that he played deep. Kayvon Merriweather, who had left the last game with an injury, did play this week, but he only played 23% of the snaps. That means it's the Edwards and Whitehead show, at least until Winfield comes back, and then it'll be back to the Whitehead and Winfield show. Okay? Not much more to talk about from them. The Falcons versus the Commanders. Of course, this game went into overtime, and the Falcons played a whopping 84 snaps. I told you we'd have some big snap counts coming a little bit later, and that is one of them. Jesse Bates led the team with 12 tackles, 7 solo, 1 sack. Okay, great that he had that outlier game, part of which was driven up by the 84 snaps. But Jesse Bates has tended to play more of that deep role. Don't go chasing those points from last week, folks. The linebacker snap percentage. Caden Ellis played 100% of the snaps, 9 tackles, second on the team. Also had an interception, which was great for him. Nate Landman, 41%. J.D. Bertrand, 31%. So Landman, 41%. Bertrand, 31%. Bertrand pulled in a sack, and he was actually blitzing, and they were using Caden Ellis more as a decoy a couple of different times, and then they dropped Ellis out and then had Landman blitz from the other side. Excuse me, Bertrand blitz from the other side, not Landman. So that contributed to Bertrand getting a sack and getting close to another one that I saw when watching the game. Landman and Bertrand cannot be played or trusted, folks. 6 tackles for Landman, 5 for Bertrand. Those are combined tackles. That was with 84 snaps. with that kind of snap count, can't play him. Matt Judon played 61% of the snaps, his best game of the year production-wise so far. He had 4 solo tackles, a sack, quarterback hit, 2 tackles for loss. Say that even though he had a sack and a pick six the previous week because he had more tackles, excuse me. But at age 32, we're not chasing Judon for next year, folks. Trying to trade him. In fact, I would use this as a opportunity to say, look how well he's played the last 2 weeks. The Falcons finally started using him right late in the year, et cetera, and try and trade him when we get to the offseason. Ebiketie played 47%. Yeah, he got another sack, but we're still not chasing Arnold Ebiketie, folks. Don't do it. Okay, even though 3 of the last 5 games, I believe it is, he's had a sack, but we're still not chasing him. Let's go to Panthers versus the Bucks. If the Bucks only play 47 snaps, that means the Panthers are going to play a lot more, and they played 77 snaps, folks. It was a blowout game. Josie Jewell was inactive. They already have Shaq Thompson, Trevin Wallace, Claude Charles. So their 4 top linebackers were on injured reserve. So what does that mean? First, Jacoby Wyman, who played last week, he actually played 86% of the snaps this week, was third on the team with 10 tackles, 7 which were solo, got a half a sack as part of that. And he had a quarterback hit, and he actually got a pass defense as well. So pretty productive on 86%. Once again, that was on 77 snaps. Keep that in mind. But the Panthers defense was so bad, maybe they'll play that much again. He's worth the risk of playing. Now, the other linebacker spot, Chandler Wooten. He started a game for the Panthers earlier this year. Right after that game, he was released. Wasn't picked up, eventually signed to the 49ers practice squad where he's been sitting. Panthers, because of the injuries, signed him off the 49ers practice squad and immediately put him in the starting lineup, and he played 100% of the snaps and led the team with 14 tackles, 7 of which were solo. So Weinman had 10, Wooten had 14, Wooten 100%, Weinman 86% of the snaps. That's how it played out. Sometimes you don't have to be the best player, but opportunity can give you snaps. We see it in running backs a lot of the time. You can see it in linebackers a lot of the time. That's what happened here. Not someone that we want for dynasty, but if you're in a pinch for week 18, you can probably play either one of those guys, assuming Josie Jewell is not playing. If Jewell's playing, it's not clear if it's Wooten or Weinman that's going to play. I'd be really careful about that. And if I had to place a bet, and I look in my crystal ball, if Jewell comes back, my bet is actually Wooten, not Weinman, would play the number 2 linebacker role. But that number 2 linebacker role for the Panthers, once again, only plays 75 to 85% of the snaps usually. Okay, keep that in mind as well. Ashawn Robinson only played 49% of the snaps. Jadeveon Clowney only played 52% of the snaps. DJ Wanham only 64% of the snaps. Usually all 3 of those folks much higher. Blowout game. They didn't play as much. At the cornerback position, I had to give a Caleb Farley shout out because another burnt toast situation. Poor guy, former number 1 pick of the Titans. 4 straight weeks of 0%. J.C. Horn's out. Shamar Smith-Wade is out. They throw him out there. He got toasted. He did play 100% of the snaps, but he got toasted pretty bad. At the safety position, Xavier Woods and Damani Richardson once again played 100%. Jordan Fuller, healthy scratch. Nick Scott, 0% of the snaps on defense. They wanted to try out Damani Richardson, see what they had with this undrafted free agent from Texas A&M. I think what they should have learned, if they hadn't, they should have learned about the middle second quarter, is Damani Richardson is not someone they can rely upon for next year. Don't go chasing his snap count. Don't go chasing his stats. Don't do it, folks. He was an undrafted free agent. I expect them to address that position in free agency of the draft this coming year. You can say goodbye to Scott. You can say goodbye to Fuller on the Panthers for next year. Let's move on to the Saints to wrap up the NFC South. The Saints played a whopping 78 snaps on defense against the Raiders. The Raiders, one of the worst rushing teams in football. The Saints, okay, just as a side note, most of y'all know, but in case we have any new listeners, the Saints are my team. Saints and LSU. I don't hide it. I want to make sure everybody's aware. So I try not to be biased when I'm talking about them, but I do vent sometimes. And here's vending. Okay, Amir Abdullah in his career, the 31-year-old running back, had never rushed for over 100 yards until this past Sunday against the Saints. Need I say more about them needing to blow things up? Okay. Demario Davis, 100% of the snaps. Pete Werner. This week they decided to play him 90% of the snaps. Okay. 90%, 80%, 70%, 90%, 70%. You just never know how much they're going to play him. Hard to trust Pete Werner in that situation. Now, they both tied for the team lead with 13 combined tackles, which, with 78 snaps, that's what we typically expect to see something around the 12, 13 range as opposed to the 9, 10 range. So nothing too exciting from that regard. The snap count drove that up. I will give a shout out to Colin Saunders. That big man, at least he's hustling and trying. He had 7 tackles, 3 which were solo. So I'm sprinting down the line to chase down along the sideline to play. The week before, fighting hard to get a tip off for an interception that he should have had, but his own man got greedy and tried to take it away from him. I'm talking about you, Alante Taylor, and caused it to go incomplete. But Colin Sanders, really playing hard. Not someone we're going to chase his stats, folks, but just a shout out to him. Cam Jordan, 53% of the snaps, probably his last home game for the Saints. 3 tackles, including a sack, a quarterback hit, 2 tackles for loss. So a very nice way to probably end his, at least Saints career. I expect he'll be wearing another uniform next year. For salary cap purposes, I expect them to have to move on. Now, Carl Granderson, down to 56% of the snaps this week, folks. That was after 52% the week before. Mostly this year, he's been in the high 70s, high to mid 70s, and that's 2 weeks in a row in the 50s. Obviously, the coaching staff is disappointed in his performance, or they just decided Tano Passignon, who they activated off of IR finally because he had an Achilles injury in the offseason, and they finally activated him, and they trying to give him his opportunities, and Peyton Turner and Chase Young and Isaiah Foskey play a little bit, maybe trying to give all these guys a chance, but regardless, Granderson got taken way down. I do expect a different coaching staff next year. As a result of that, hopefully they'll figure out how to use Granderson better. You might be able to get him on the cheap. Alante Taylor played 97% of the snaps. Good news is that only 81% was at outside corner. So he played a little bit more in the box or slot and along the D line and so forth, but 2 solo tackles, 2 pass defense. Once again, we've talked about it on this show a lot. How they're utilized is key. And Ugo Amadi, let me talk about Ugo Amadi, then we'll come back to that in a second here. Ugo Amadi only played 48% of the snaps. 4 tackles, 3 solo, 1 pass defense. Okay. We talk about a lot with cornerbacks, but for the folks that are new, and as a reminder to all, when you're playing a lot of outside cornerback and not playing a lot in that near the line, slot, box, or on the D line, hard to generate stats a lot of the time. Okay. Ugo Amadi took over the role that Alante Taylor had close to the line of scrimmage in that box slot D-line role and has been very productive. Last week, not as much because there wasn't as much 11 personnel for Washington Commanders. Again, this week, the Raiders play a lot of 2 tight ends, some 3 tight ends. You see a lot of Brock Bowers, you see a lot of Michael Mayer, see some Harrison Bryant, see some, what's his name, John Shocker, I believe he is, the undrafted free agent. Raiders play a lot of tight ends. Terrace Marshall was their number 3 wide receiver. I think he played like 38% of the snaps, or 33%. So in those kind of situations, that slot cornerback, that nickel cornerback, whatever you want to call it, is not going to play as much snaps, limiting their opportunity, ability to get those IDP stats. So that's what happened with Amadi this week. Moving Taylor from that slot role to the outside has killed him later in the year in terms of the stat count and all. And so that's what we have going on, folks, with the Saints. Okay. All righty. We're going to move to the NFC West. And as we are doing that, I want to remind you that we will be doing our Start Sit show again this Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central, to once again help you folks playing in Week 18. We will take a couple of dynasty questions, but we do want to primarily focus on start sits for those that have a championship game. Like I said, we'll do more dynasty stuff, and we'll take a lot of questions from the dynasty side of things as we move into the new calendar year. But we'll try, we'll answer a few of those, but we'll try and focus primarily on start sit this Sunday morning, 11 a.m. Eastern. Sean is already confirmed to be there, and it looks like Michael will be there as well. So you have three of us to help you out. Okay. NFC West. Let's talk about the Cardinals played against the Rams. They only played 57 snaps, which is on the lower side, obviously. Kaiser White played 100% of the snaps, led the team with 8 tackles. Mack Wilson returned from injury, played typical Mack Wilson, roughly 72% of the snaps, ended up with 6 tackles combined. Zaven Collins, who had played like 75% last week, so I wanted to track and see what happened this week. He was down to 63%, 3 assisted tackles, 1 quarterback hit. Nothing too exciting there. But because he had that higher snap count, wanted to see how that would translate. Baron Browning, 53%, where he'd gotten some sacks in previous couple of weeks. Did not happen this week. 1 assisted tackle. He's pretty much a sack or nothing, folks. That's what you're looking at with Baron Browning. Still like his upside, though, particularly in a Jonathan Gannon defense. If they do re-sign him, he is a free agent at the end of this year. Buda Baker played 100% of the snaps, but that low snap count certainly hurt him. He is actually 3rd in tackles, folks, in the NFL going into this past weekend. I'm not sure. I haven't looked up where he finished after Week 17, but going into Week 17, he was 3rd in tackles in the league with Zaire Franklin leading. That's great from a safety position as a side note. That's the kind of numbers you want. I actually traded for him in a dynasty league. About midway through the year because I love that tackle floor and what it brings. And then anything he gets on top of that, tackles for loss, quarterback hits, a sack on a blitz, are just gravy on top. 49ers versus the Lions on Monday night. They ended up playing 71 snaps. I'm going to start off with their leading tackler, who is a cornerback, Diamador Lenore. He led the team with 9 tackles, 5 of which were solo on 100% of the snaps. What was interesting, though, he played 85% of the snaps in the slot or the box. So what was happening is when they were just in 2 wide, he played on the outside. But whenever they were 3 wide, he was the man that moved to the middle. And Renardo Green and Isaac Yiadom, Yaidom, however you pronounce it, were the 2 guys that played the outside, and Lenore went into the slot. Back to what we were just talking about with the Saints, Lenore playing that much in the slot, obviously he was the leading tackler. That could bode well for him as we look ahead to next year, if that's how they will continue to use him. And of course, he just got that big fat contract, so expect him to play a lot. Nick Bosa had a freaking wow game, 87% of the snaps, so that was great to see after he had, had that oblique injury or 2 obliques that were injured. Luckily, he didn't get a concussion on one of those plays, and he was able to come back in the game. But listen to this: 8 tackles, 5 solo, 2 sacks, 4 tackles for loss, 4 quarterback hits, particularly in big play scoring or even heavy tackle scoring systems. He should have done really well for you, particularly for those that were in Week 17 championships. Dre Greenlaw did not play. Shanahan talked about the fact that he would be out the next 2 weeks. They weren't going to play him these last 2 weeks, so he didn't play in Week 17. He's not going to play in Week 18. In fact, on Tuesday afternoon, before I filmed this show, Dre Greenlaw was officially put on IR. I wish they would have done it last week because that was kind of annoying, because then a lot of leagues you could have put him on IR and then picked up someone to stash on your bench, like a Jordan McGee or a Jeremiah Trotter, as an example. But I digress. D. Winters ended up being, as we talked about in here, he was going to be the linebacker to replace Greenlaw. That's what happened. He played 87% of the snaps. A couple of times he did have to go off the field with injuries, but he did come back in. 8 tackles and 3 solo. Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles played 21% of the snaps. Jalen Graham played 15%. Tatum Bethune played 6%. As a side note, Devondre Campbell didn't play any snaps. Get it? He was suspended. We all know that. Sorry, that's a bad joke. We move on. Don't. Hopefully you didn't hang up after that one, or disconnect or whatever. Malik Mustafa played 97% of the snaps. He played 49% of those deep, which contributed to only 4 solo tackles. Talanoa Hufanga played only 79% of the snaps. I haven't seen anything injury-wise that was reported. He played 57% of the snaps deep, but he ended up with 6 tackles, 5 of which were solo. So, but when we have him playing that much deep, that's somebody we don't want to trust. So we'll leave it at that. Jair Brown played 24%, but he is, as we've talked about the past few weeks, he is the number 3 linebacker, number 3 safety when Mustafa and Hufanga are active. Moving on to the Rams versus the Cardinals. The Rams played a whopping 79 snaps on defense. Christian Roseboom played 90% of those. We're seeing him in that 90+% range. He's usually hyper efficient from a tackling perspective, but he only had 6 tackles through, which were solo, on 90% of 79 snaps. That ain't good, folks. Omar Spates played 71%, which is typical for that number 2 linebacker role. He has fluctuated, but he's starting to kind of normalize in that low 70, high 60 range as the number 2 linebacker. He actually led the team with 10 tackles, 5 of which were solo. He didn't look quite as lost this past week as he's had in previous weeks, so he's starting to maybe get a better feel for the game. And I'm kind of regretting that I traded him. But oh well. We'll see how that plays out next year. Cam Curl played 97% of the snaps. Now, last week he played 74% deep. This week it was only 52% deep. Quentin Lake played 100% of the snaps. He played 84% in the slot box or D-line, which is where we like him. Unfortunately, he only had 5 tackles, 4 which were solo. He played 79 snaps. I mean, think about that. That's really bad for that kind of positioning on the field and with that many snaps. Quentin Lake is someone who, if you may recall, and if I'm recalling correctly, was a 7th round draft pick, maybe 6th round out of UCLA. Anyway, late round, let's just call it that. He's someone that if you've got him on your roster, dynasty tidbit, trade him. We'll talk about it in the offseason about repeat top 12 rates of repeat top 12 rates at all the positions, including safety. Safety is low. I'll tell you, it's usually around 3. So Lake is someone you're trying to sell high. Cam Kinchins, as a side note, only played 62% of the snaps. 80% deep. Last week, 76% deep. So he tends to play deep when he's out there, but he's not out there. But 80% of the time, 60% of the time, roughly. Jalen McCullough, we said don't chase it last week. He was back down to 28%. That's what we expected to happen. Byron Young had a huge game for an edge with 8 tackles, 5 solo, and he got the sack with the ones, which means he got 1 sack, 1 tackle for loss, 1 quarterback hit. Braden Fisk, 2 more sacks, 3 quarterback hits in total. Another very solid game for Braden Fisk. With the young talent they have up front, with Fisk, with Kobe Turner, with Jared Verse, with Byron Young, the future is very bright for this Rams defensive line, an area to target next year in your redrafts, or even if you're looking for dynasty trades. Go after those front 4 for the Rams. Seahawks versus Bears. I need to pick up the pace a little bit here. They played 62 snaps on defense against that putrid Bears offense. 4 players tied for the team lead with a whopping 6 combined tackles each. So in other words, there's not a lot to talk about from the tackle side of things. Ernest Jones, 100%, 6 combined tackles. Tyrese Knight only played 74% of the snaps, 6 combined tackles. Now, the team had 7 sacks and 10 quarterback hits, given that Bears' sorry offensive line and Caleb Williams holding the ball too long was part of the reason that I was so much higher on Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams in the offseason. Not just because I'm an LSU bias fan, but because of Caleb Williams ad-libbing so much and holding the ball so long. Things along those lines. It just had a bad feeling it would take time for him to break out of that. Okay, I digress. Draymond Jones was back up to 52% of the snaps, but only had one tackle. Uchenna Nwosu, he was up to a season high 67% in his fourth week back. He is considered to be one of their two top edge players, along with Boy Mafe, who played 72% of the snaps. Now, Nwosu, 4 tackles, 3 solo. He had the ones, meaning 1 sack, 1 TFL, 1 quarterback hit. He also had a pass defense as well. Mafe had 4 solo tackles and a pass defense. Nwosu, if you're in a Week 18 final, and if he's sitting out there on waivers because of the injuries all year, he is someone I would be considering targeting. Once again, I'm not going to try, play him over. Come on, Ricky. I'm not going to play him over Trey Hendrickson, for example. I'm not going to play him over T.J. Watt, for example. But depending on what you have, Nwosu on the edge is a very interesting play. Okay, Leonard Williams continues to be a freaking beast with 80% snap count. 5 solo tackles, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, 4 quarterback hits. The man's an animal. He is putting himself into the top 5 defensive tackle range or interior defensive lineman for next year, folks. Got to consider him there along with the Jeffrey Simmons of the world as an example. Devin Witherspoon also had 6 tackles. They were all solo, and part of that he got a sack and 3 tackles for loss, although he didn't get a quarterback hit stat-wise. So sometimes they give him credit for like when they chase him out of bounds. I didn't see this specific play, but it was just interesting that he didn't get a quarterback hit on it, but he did get the sack. Kobe Bryant, 6 combined tackles. Remember, he plays deep 80-90% of the time. Hard to trust that. Similar with Julian Love, who doesn't play quite as deep quite as much, but played deep a lot. He only had 5 tackles, 5 combined tackles. All right, we are going to move to the AFC East. And I am going to pick up the pace a little bit and leave out some of the tackle counts in some cases to help you hopefully try and keep this to the 90 minutes that I typically try and do. They only played 63 snaps because it was a blowout game. Terrell Bernard, 59%. Balin Spector had been put on IR. Nicholas Morrow, who they released previously, was re-signed, but it was Joey Andreessen who played the other 41%. 59 plus 41 gives you your 100. Matt Milano returned from injury again. He played 56% of the snaps. Once again, blowout. He didn't play that much. Dorian Williams ended up playing 40%. Okay, so there's your Bills linebacker situation. Both Bernard and Milano appear to be healthy. They'll be your starters. The thing to worry about the Bills for your public service announcement for this week, they have nothing to play for. It certainly sounds like, in listening to Coach Sean McDermott, that the starters may play a series or 2, and then they will be out. For example, he said it sounds like they're going to start Josh Allen just to keep his consecutive games started stat going, and then he'll be sitting shortly thereafter. And the same thing could be said for probably Bernard and Milano and Greg Russo and Ed Oliver, James Cook, etc. So be careful about playing your Bills this coming week, everybody. The safety position, almost forgot. Taylor Rapp returned and played 100% of the snaps, 46% deep. DeMar Hamlin was inactive again. It was Cole Bishop, not Cam Lewis, who played 100% of the snaps. Cole Bishop. He played 54% deep, so I'll check that out for you all as well, thanks to PFF once again. Cam Lewis still played 44% of the snaps, but if Hamlin's out again, which is likely, given what I just talked about the Bills, so you could see a lot of Cole Bishop and Cam Lewis at the safety position this week, everybody. Von Miller, AJ Epinesa, Ed Oliver all had full sacks. Greg Russo had half a sack in that game. So at least they gave us a little bit of productivity. Let's move to the Dolphins versus Browns. The Dolphins played 79 snaps on defense. That's a heck of a lot. Hard to believe they played that against a DTR-led offense for the Browns, but that's what happened. It was a bit of a blowout later in the game, so some of the starters did not play as much as normal. In fact, you'll see that a bunch of them came out at the 90% snap mark, starting with Jordan Brooks. He had left the last game with an injury. He was active this week, played 90% of the snaps, led the team with 9 tackles, including a tackle for loss. Now, last week when Brooks was injured, Duke Riley came in for him and played his other snaps last week. And Duke Riley played the other 10% of the snaps when Brooks was out this week. At the other linebacker position, the green dot position, Anthony Walker was inactive. And instead of Riley playing, it was Tyrell Dodson that played 100% of the snaps in that Walker role. And he had a career game with 15 tackles, which were solo. He had an interception, which means he also got a pass defense. He also got a quarterback hit. Monster game for Tyrell Dodson. With the Dolphins having something to play for, obviously the playoffs. If Anthony Walker's out, we're very comfortable playing Tyrell Dodson. We're very comfortable playing Jordan Brooks. As a side note, Jordan Poyer, Jevon Holland, Kader Kohou all played 90% of the snaps. Jalen Ramsey, 85%. But that goes back to the blows I was talking about earlier. Chop Robinson played 66% of the snaps this week. His previous season high, career high, was 67, so he was right up there with that. But he unfortunately only had one tackle this week, so he's now at 6 sacks in his last 9 games instead of 8 games that he was last week. He doesn't get you many tackles beyond the sacks at this point, but he's doing well, or even better as the year has progressed in pressure win rate, according to PFF. He's someone in sack, big play scoring systems to consider for next year. Let's go to the Jets versus Bills. They played 70 snaps in this true blowout game. Even in this blowout game, Jamie and Sherwood played 96% of the snaps and Quincy Williams 100%. Both finished with 10 tackles, 5 solo, 1 tackle for loss. That was pretty darn interesting that they finished with those same exact stats. Quinnen Williams was returned from a hamstring injury. He only played 43% of the snaps. Not clear if it was the hamstring, the blowout, or combination of the two that impacted him. He's usually in the high 60s, low 70s, but he did not play very much. Hassan Reddick, once again, only 57% of the snaps with 2 solo tackles. Hopefully he gets in a better situation next year. I don't think he's washed up. I just think missing, the off season, so many games, the Jets situation. Reddick, maybe you target cheap in dynasty. He is getting he's around age 30. Keep that in mind as well, though. Will McDonald was back up to 73% of the snaps. No tackles, no sacks. He did have 2 quarterback hits. He's similar to Chop Robinson in that he's a sack or bust for the most part type of player. The safety story this week, Chuck Clark played 100% of the snaps for the second week in a row. But what was interesting, he got put on IR on Monday. Not sure what happened when he played 100% of the snaps, but then he got put on IR. He still had 8 tackles, which is great. But it'll probably be the Tony Adams, and I'm speculating the other safety will be Ashton Davis. Earlier this year, Tony Adams did play closer to the line in the first couple of games. When Chuck Clark was on IR coming out of the preseason, I expect Tony Adams to play closer to the line, more that box row, Ashton Davis to play a little bit deeper. That is a gamble. Part of the reason, though, I believe that is Isaiah Oliver is going to have to stay at the cornerback position. Sauce Gardner left this past game, again, re-aggravating his hamstring. I think they'll need him in the cornerback position, that he being Isaiah Oliver, which opens up the safety snaps for Adams and Ashton Davis. So what was a 5-person rotation not too long ago is basically back down to 2, with Mills being on IR and Oliver having to play cornerback and Clark being on IR. Moving on to the Patriots versus the Chargers. They played a massive 79 snaps in a very embarrassing game. How did they play that bad against the Chargers when they played so much better against the Bills and only played 59 snaps the week before in defense? I digress. I think Mayo is in trouble after 1 year. Be careful about snap counts because this was a blowout game. Keon White, on the one hand, only played 51% of the snaps. Part could be for blowout, but I did see him being injured during that game. I did not see him come back into the game. I didn't have a chance to watch every play, though. But between the injury and the blowout, I doubt if he did go back in, watch the injury reports for Keon White. Jabril Peppers is inactive again with that ankle injury. Duggar played 96% of the snaps, second on the team with tackles with 9 combined. He played 62% close to the line, 38% deep. That's not bad. Nine combined tackles, pretty good. Now remember, that was on 79 snaps, though. So maybe it could have been a little bit better after all. Marte Mapu, third-round rookie from last year from Sacramento State. 75% of the snaps. He had, he played very well last week in about the same amount of snaps. Played very well again this week with 7 combined tackles, but he did play 50% of the snaps deep. At 6'2", around 230 or 6'3", 230, maybe the next regime will play him more as a linebacker than as a safety. Jalen Hawkins played 34% of the snaps. He played 67% of those deep. On the linebacker side of things, Tavai, 75%, Christian Ellis, 62%, Sion Taki, 39%. He did have 8 combined tackles, did Taki, but remember, we're not chasing Taki, okay? He is a number 3/number 4 type linebacker on a team per se, not from a fantasy perspective, and more of a special teamer. Bengals versus the Broncos as we will now move to the AFC North. And let me flip the banner there to AFC North. Okay, they played only 60 snaps on defense. The Broncos played a whopping 90 snaps in that overtime game. Sheldon Rankins, inactive again, was finally put on injured reserve with this illness that he has. It was actually put on the NFI list, I should say, not on injured reserve. It's sort of an injured reserve list, but it's a non-football injury list. BJ Hill, as a result, this week played a whopping 90% of the snaps, a season high for him. So if you're desperate, a defensive tackle / interior, playing him this coming week isn't the worst thing in the world to consider doing. Okay, against now last week's fool's goal was Chris Jenkins. I told you he only played 47% of the snaps. He did get 2 sacks, but don't go chasing it. This week his snap count was down to 37%. So even though he got the 2 sacks last week, they bumped Hill's playing time up. They took Jenkins' time down. That tells you all you need to know right there. So hopefully you didn't chase him. Sam Hubbard out on the edge again with that PCL injury he has. Didn't get put on IR because they still have a chance to make the playoffs. Trey Hendrickson, 82% of the snaps were played. It wasn't the best of matchups when you look at the Broncos and points given to edge players, but he did at least get you half a sack and a couple quarterback hits. Joseph Asai, all the way up to 83% of the snaps. Very, very effective game with 8 tackles, 5 solo, half a sack, and a pass defense. So Joseph Asai, once again, your deeper leagues, 83%. That means that man was running all over the field and played a lot of snaps. You can take the chance in your deeper leagues of playing Osai in your championship game in Week 18. Miles Murphy down to 40% from 52% was interesting. Cedric Johnson jumped up from 9 to 18% week over week. And he had 2 combined tackles, including a sack. As part of that, did Cedric Johnson. Miles Murphy played 40% of the snaps. No stats, 0, zilch, goose egg, nothing from Miles Murphy. So talked about it previously. Miles Murphy is one of these later round, first round picks that isn't most likely going to pan out from an IDP perspective. Try and sell him if you can using the legacy first round pick, third year breakout, blah, 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 next year. At the linebacker position, Akeem Davis-Gaither, 100%, Jermaine Pratt, 83% of the snaps. Didn't see anything from an injury perspective that would say something was wrong with Pratt. So watch out for injury reports if you're playing in Week 18. Akeem Davis-Gaither only had 6 combined tackles and 1 tackle for loss. Very disappointing. Pratt, 7 combined tackles and a pass defense. Very disappointing in that Week 17, whether it be your semifinal or finals. They really let us down here, folks. Didn't see any linebackers playing any other snaps according to the snap count percentages. Those were only 2 that played. Check on the Pratt for injuries as we go into Week 18. Geno Stone, 100%. Jordan Battle, 88%. Von Bell, 30% with absolutely no stats. Did Von Bell, no stats whatsoever. Jordan Battle continues to play a decent amount deep, which isn't good. He played 49% deep. That is not going to be good for IDP, and he only had 5 combined tackles. Okay. Browns versus Dolphins, they played only 60 snaps on defense. There was a bit of blowout later in the game. Looking at the defensive end, the edge side of things, Okoronkwo was inactive, which means Myles Garrett played 87% of the snaps. Isaiah McGuire played 90% of the snaps. We're not chasing Isaiah McGuire, for the record, when you hear that he had 3 tackles, 2 solo, a sack, 2 tackles for loss, and 3 quarterback hits. We're not chasing that. We're going to watch, but we're not chasing it right now. Myles Garrett had 2 more sacks, almost had a third, but they didn't give it to him. The quarterback had kind of fallen down, and Garrett was the first one to touch him, but they didn't give him a sack on that one. Look, there's nothing to trust in the remaining defensive and edge players by the Browns leadership team, i.e. head coach Kevin Stefanski and their defensive coordinator. So you saw a little bit of Cam Thomas as an example, but it's really Garrett McGuire, unless Okoronkwo comes back from injury. The linebacker story, Jordan Hicks played 52% of the snaps, 7 combined tackles and quarterback hit before he left with an injury. Diabate, 70% of the snaps, exactly 70% for the second week in a row. Devin Bush was up to 57 from 41% due to the Hicks injury. Winston Reed actually even got in 8%, the undrafted free agent rookie. So that's the Browns linebackers. It's a mess unless Hicks plays. There was an interesting tidbit on JOK, Jeremiah Owusu-Karamoso. There was a tidbit that I saw that there's question if it's career-ending, this neck injury that he had. So be very careful trying to be smart and saying, oh boy, he was great until he got injured, and so I'm going to trade for him to have him for next year, because the owner might not realize how productive he was before he got hurt. With that piece of tidbit, I'd be very careful about trying to acquire JOK in dynasty leagues, folks. Shelby Harris was out again this week. Michael Hall was down to 53% from his 62%. Wasn't nearly as productive as the week before. Still someone in deep leagues. We're stashing from an interior defensive line perspective. Michael Hall, that is. Shelby Harris is old. We're not doing him. And on the safeties, Delpit played his normal 100%. He only played 7% deep. Leading the team in tackles is Delpit. And once again, another one of these safeties with a high tackle floor. Unfortunately, they're not blitzing him nearly as much as they have in the past. So he's not creating those big play sacks. But hopefully that'll change next year. But at least he's got that tackle floor. Ravens only played 56 snaps against the Texans in a complete blowout. Kyle Hamilton and Darius Washington, as well as Marlon Humphrey and Brandon Stevens, also all 4 of them played 89% of the snaps before they were relegated to the bench for the rest of the game because of the status of the blowout. I looked. Hamilton played 64% of the snaps deep. Washington, 74% deep. Roquan Smith, once again, he too also played only 89% of the snaps. Outside of Roquan and Marlon Humphrey, no one else had more than 4 combined tackles. As a result of that, there's not much more to talk about. Other than that, Christian Welch and Trenton Simpson both played 11% of the snaps. If you pay attention to 89 and 11, that's your 100. So they were the people that went in, they being Welch and Trent Simpson, when the game was a complete blowout. That's when they got their defensive snaps. Okay, going on to the Steelers real quick. They played 62 snaps on defense for the second week in a row, exactly 62. Deshaun Elliott returned. I warned you all, Fitzpatrick. I gave you the good upside that says if Elliott's out, Fitzpatrick's going to play closer to the line, which he did last week. And I told you last week, if Elliott comes back, Fitzpatrick is probably going to go back deep. What happened? Elliott returned, played 94% of the snaps, played only 12% deep. Fitzpatrick played 100% of the snaps. He did tie for the lead with 7 combined tackles for the team, but he played 50% deep this week. Last week, he only played 24%. The previous 2 weeks was 72 and 64. In this championship week, don't trust Minkah Fitzpatrick, even though he led the team this week in tackles, and in the previous week, played closer to the box and was very productive, including having that interception. Stay away from Fitzpatrick is my guidance. Patrick Queen played 100%. Landon Roberts played 53%. Peyton Wilson played 47%. 53 plus 47 is 100. Now, interestingly enough, on Tuesday, Cole Holcomb began practicing. Cole Holcomb, devastating injury last year, was a starter for the Steelers last year. Part of the reason they signed Queen is they knew with a devastating injury he wasn't going to be able to play a lot this year. But Holcomb was activated to start playing. If someone dropped him in your dynasty leagues, someone to potentially pick up and stash, who knows? And by the time playoff comes, it could be Queen and um, Holcomb playing and not Roberts and or Wilson. Something to watch, folks. Okay, Cam Hayward continues to amaze at age 35, playing 81% of the snaps and being productive. Now, TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith, Watt 79%, Alex Highsmith 84% of the snaps. Nick Herbig played 37% of the snaps. 21 plus 16, which is the two percentages that Watt and Highsmith didn't play. 21 plus 16 equals 37. 37% is what Herbig played. A pure three-person rotation across those folks. Why? Preston Smith was made inactive for the game. So he wasn't even on the 47 that played this week. It wasn't because of injury either. So that's going to be your rotation. You can't play Herbig with at 37% or 35 or 45, but that's how much they think of Herbig. That's what's going on there. Okay, we are now going to move to the AFC South, folks. And as we're doing that, just another plug for IDP Plus for those that are watching and are those that are listening. IDP Plus, use the promo code PROPS. You will get 20% off. And earlier in the show, I talked about all the great things you get. Let's go to the AFC South, the Colts versus the Giants. They played only 56 snaps on defense. The Giants went through the Colts defense like a knife going through hot butter. I mean, just right through it. It was something else. Zaire Franklin played 100% of the snaps as he typically does, and he had a massive game, so I'll give him credit. 14 tackles, 7 solo, 4 tackles for loss. Now, he did give us a dud in week 16, which I'm bitter about, as you can tell by the way I said that, but came back here in week 17 for those that were able to move on. EJ Speed played 98% of the snaps. Now, very disappointing, only 5 unassisted tackles, not a typical EJ Speed game. I wonder if this had something to do with that knee injury that had him out the week before. If this was the case, they should have had Jalen Carley's playing in his spot. They shouldn't have had him playing, and I'm sure he probably ended up hurting several folks in their fantasy playoffs last week. Not sure I'm trusting EJ Speed as if you're playing in week 18. Jalen Carley's was the number 3 linebacker, but only played 32% of the snaps. DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart both played season-high snap percents of defensive tackle of 89 and 70. So obviously that didn't do much good as the Giants just went through the Colts defense so quickly that they only need 56 snaps to score 45 points. Now, I know there was a special teams touchdown and all, but still. Nick Cross only had 7 tackles, 7 combined tackles, that is. Part of that was attributed to the 56 snaps that they played. Now, Slim Reaper, I hope you took the advice and looked, because I responded to your question on YouTube. I said, play Brandon Jones over Nick Cross. I hope you listened to me, took that advice, and played him, and I hope it helped you to get a championship or at least move on to the playoffs, whichever way it was. The Colts' 4-man defensive end rotation continued. Now, next year, Samson Ebukam will be coming back from injury, but Dayo Odeyingbo is going to be a free agent, and I doubt they re-sign him after drafting Latu in the first round. That means that they're going to have at least that 4 defensive end rotation situation, which could be bad for all 4 of those guys and not giving us the snap count and the IDP results that we're looking for as we think ahead to next year. Jaguars versus Titans. The Jaguars played a very nice 69 snaps on defense. Foye Aluakon played 100% of the snaps. Yes, he led the team with 11 combined tackles, including 1 tackle for loss in the pass defense. However, he played 13 of the 69 snaps in the slot. which was 19%. He played 2 of the 69 snaps at deep safety from an alignment perspective. Not sure how that rotation ended up happening. So that was 3%. So 22% of his snaps were outside of the box. At least he still gave us 11 combined tackles on that 100% of the snaps. Devin Lloyd was at 70%, 6 combined tackles. At least he got us that interception, which includes a pass defense, of course. Vincho Miller was inactive. Chad Mewman, 9% of the snaps. That's how linebackers played out. Josh Allen Hines and Trayvon Walker. I told you all that would be they had a chance for a good matchup here. Josh Allen Hines was very productive, taking advantage of that matchup with 6 tackles, 3 which were solo, a sack, 2 tackles for loss, 2 quarterback hits. Trayvon Walker did have 2 combined tackles, a sack, and 2 quarterback hits. So each one got a sack. Mason Smith, the second-round rookie out of LSU, played at 67% of the snaps, which was a career high for him, 2 tackles and a sack. This bodes well for him. You know, some people could say I got an LSU bias, but there's a certain amount of him that does remind me of a young Chris Jones who played at Mississippi State. So I watched a lot of SEC football through the years. Mason Smith is someone in your deeper leagues to target for that interior defensive line / defensive tackle position. Darnell Savage was inactive. Andre Cisco plays 100% of the snaps. He had 8 combined tackles, which was a season high for him. What have we learned about when you have this outlier from a tackle perspective? Don't expect it to repeat next week. Be careful about chasing Cisco's points. Andrew Wingard was the other safety at 100%. Antonio Johnson only played 30%. So it looks like he's dropped to 4th in the safety list of safeties for the Jaguars, with Savage being 1, Cisco 2, Wingard 3, and Antonio Johnson 4. Depth chart, I couldn't think of it. Depth chart, my goodness gracious. Must be getting tired. It's getting closer to New Year's Eve here in Austin, Texas. As I record this. Texans versus Ravens. 63 snaps played by the Texans in this blowout game. Because of the blowout, impacted snap counts. Daniil Hunter, 51%. Will Anderson, 48%. Daniil Hunter, only 2 combined tackles. At least Will Anderson got you 3 combined tackles and half a sack and a couple of quarterback hits and a pass defense. But because of the blowout, didn't come through for you. Toto, Christian Harris, Hewitt, each one of them only had 5 combined tackles, with Toto 83% of the snaps, Christian Harris 70%, Neville Hewitt 46%. Here's the tricky thing now for those of you playing Week 18. Azeez Al-Shaair on Monday was removed from the suspended list after serving his 3-game suspension. I do expect Al-Shaair to move into that number 1 Mike Green dot position. And right now, I'm assuming, because Toto played 83% of the snaps, Harris played 70%. So I'm assuming that Toto's the number 2, Harris is the number 3. But that's risky. I do think Al-Shaair will be back at 100%. But boy, there's a little bit of a gamble if you need to play Texans linebackers here in your fantasy football championships if you're playing in Week 18. Eric Murray played 83% of the snaps. He led the team with 9 tackles, 4 of which were solo. He played 71% of in the box / D-line / slot. Kamari Lassiter, who played some slot as well in cornerback position, it looks like he's going to move back to the outside, and at least in practice, Miles Bryant was getting more of those slot snaps as opposed to Okudah on the outside and Lassiter moving to the inside. So that's what it looks like for the Texans. But boy, there's a lot of gambles going to Week 18, given those moving pieces and all the injuries they've had, and they're working around. Lastly, for the Titans versus the Jags, the Titans defense only played 58 snaps. Kenneth Murray went on IR. Otis Reese was inactive. So how the linebacker position played out? As we pretty much told you. Luke Gifford, 100%. Jerome Baker, 95%. Cedric Gray played 0% after having those 15 tackles last week. Warned you all that was a big risk, James Williams only played 1 snap. Told you he wasn't the guy either. So that's how it played out. Gifford and Baker. Gifford led the team with 8 combined tackles and a pass defense. Baker had 6 combined tackles and got you a sack, and he got a pass defense as well. So but I'm not trusting Jerome Baker. I will be willing to take a chance on Luke Gifford in Week 18. Jeffrey Simmons, considering the Titan situation, and he's quote a star player, one of the highest paid players on the team, one of the highest paid interior defensive linemen in the whole league. Still 95% this week after 94% last week from a snap count perspective. 5 tackles, 3 which were solo and a quarterback hit. So he's still giving it his all, folks, even when there's nothing to play for the Titans. Amani Hooker was inactive. Mike Brown played 97% of the snaps in his absence. We're not going to trust Mike Worley in our championship games. Finally, we're going to move on to the AFC West, and I do have a lot to talk about on the AFC West, folks. As a reminder, Start Sit Show this Sunday, 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central. We'll be there to help you if you are playing in Week 18. We want to help you win your championship. The Broncos versus the Bengals. The Broncos played in that overtime game a massive 90 snaps on defense. That's basically almost 1.5 games. So you would expect a lot of IDP counting stats, and you absolutely got that from a lot of folks. They also got 7 sacks against Burrow. They were destroying the interior of the defensive line. They were getting pressure of the offensive line of the Bengals. They were impacting the edge as well. But we'll come back to that in a second. But start off, Riley Moss led the team with 14 tackles as he returned from injury. 11 of those was solo. 11 were solo. But he was absolutely destroyed, abused, whatever word you want to use, in his first game back from injury. Not sure what happened. Maybe he shouldn't have, they brought him back too soon, but he got destroyed. But cornerback required leagues, if he's not 100% and he's playing and they're going to pick on him like that, huge opportunities, okay, for him from a IDP perspective. Zach Allen played 94% of the snaps. One of the things which is amazing about Zach Allen, he plays 85 to 100% of the snaps roughly every single week. Boy, did he have a freaking monster game. Him and Nick Bosa up front were really impressive. 7 combined tackles for Zach Allen, 3.5 sacks, 2 tackles for loss, 6 quarterback hits. There was one drive also, he got basically back-to-back sacks that both of them were overturned due to injury. Excuse me, not injury, by penalty, excuse me. So Zach Allen, monster game. Hopefully you played him. Hopefully you've been playing him. People thought I was crazy earlier this year when I was making comments about playing him over Chris Jones, things along those lines. Keep Zach Allen in your lineups. Cody Barton played 94% of the snaps. Now, he disappointed with only 6 combined tackles and a pass defense on 90 snaps, folks. That's embarrassing. This is one of these guys, yeah, he's playing a lot. Doesn't make him a great linebacker. Be careful about drafting him too high next year. Justin Sterner was back to 67% of the snaps. He had only 4 combined tackles, one of which was a tackle for loss. Not very impressive. What was interesting, though, Drew Sanders played 10% of the snaps, which is 9, okay, basically. 90 snaps and 10% is 9. Not basically, it is 9. This is his second game back from injury. Last week, he played 1 snap, lined up on the defense line right over the middle. Nobody blocked him, and he got a sack. This week, on those 9 snaps, he had 4 tackles, one of which was solo. He played 8 of those in the box and 1 on the defensive line. Now, one of my brethren in the industry, when I had tweeted out to watch for Drew Sanders as he's coming back from injury, look for him to potentially be the number 2 inside linebacker next to Barton. And I got some DMs that said I didn't know what I was talking about, but at least so far, maybe I did speculate correctly. Maybe my crystal ball was correctly. I would not trust Sternad this coming week, particularly for all the marbles. I would expect Sanders' snap count to go up somewhat. I would expect Sternad's to come down a little bit more. I still think Barton plays about 100% of the snaps. Okay. Nick Bonito played 80% of the snaps, which was his highest snap count of the year, by the way, in terms of percentages. He did get two combined tackles. 1 pass defense, 2 quarterback hits. Unfortunately, he didn't get a sack again this week after that monster run he had. But, he still hustles. He's still creating other tackles and making other plays besides sacks. You still play Bonito, folks. Don't give up on him. Jonathan Cooper, 77% of the snaps. Very good game for him for an edge play with 4 combined tackles, 1.5 sacks, 2 quarterback hits. You get it. DeAndre Tillman only played 22% of the snaps and got a sack. Jonah Ellis, 27% of the snaps, all he played. So Bonito and Cooper's snap count went up in that very meaningful game. Zach Allen's, was in the 94% range. So you could see they were trying to play their top players less than a rotation. Unfortunately, they still lost the game. Brandon Jones only played 93% of the snaps. Not sure why he missed a few snaps. Maybe it was to give him rest. Not sure. Didn't see anything about any injuries. He had 13 tackles, 9 solo. So once again, Slim Reaper. I hope that's who you played over Nick Cross, as I recommended to you. PJ Locke, 94% of the snaps with 9 combined tackles. Chargers versus Patriots, another blowout game. So you can't read anything to it, but a few things we will talk about. First, no one had more than 5 combined tackles, and that was Christian Fulton and Troy Dye. So right off the bat, not good when you have that kind of blowout. Dayon Henley played only 72% of the snaps and had a complete freaking goose egg. It wasn't that he was hurt. It wasn't that coaches were mad at him and he wasn't playing. He played until the blowout happened, and he just laid a goose egg. What that's going to mean, a lot of people are going to remember that next year, and he's going to fall a little bit in IDP drafts, and we're going to pounce on him and take advantage of that. Denzel Perryman was inactive. So it looked like it was probably going to be Junior Colson as the next linebacker up. Oh, no. They went back to Troy Dye. Troy Dye went back up to 81% of the snaps this week after 2% the week before, had 5 combined tackles. Junior Colson was back down to 28% after being at 56% last week, 4 combined tackles and a quarterback hit. They must not have liked what they saw on film from Colson, went back to the more experienced Dye, who is kind of just a guy from a player perspective, but they went back to him. Disappointing for Junior Colson. Maybe next year we'll see better from him. Derwin James, similar to Henley, only played 72% of the snaps. He got the 2s, which means he got 2 solo tackles, 2 combined tackles, 2 which were solo, 2 sacks, 2 tackles for loss, 2 quarterback hits. That's 2 plays. He got all those stats. Hopefully you played in a big play scoring league that helped you out, and he also got a fumble recovery to boot. So in those big play scoring leagues, that was fantastic. I did check how much he played deep because I like to compare him and Kyle Hamilton. Derwin only played 29% of the snaps deep versus what you heard me talk about with Kyle Hamilton earlier. Elijah Molden left the game with a serious injury. He was put on IR, out for the year. It's a fibular injury requiring surgery for him. Khalil Mack a sack, Tuluti a sack, Bosa and Dupree did not. Dupree's snap count came up this week. Max and Bosa's went down because of the blowout of the game. Okay, that's how that finished. The Chiefs versus the Steelers. The Chiefs actually played their second most snaps of the year in defense with 75. This became a bit of a blowout later in the game as well. As a result, Bolton only played 79% of those 75 snaps. Tranquil, 72%. At least Bolton kind of did something with 8 combined tackles and 2 pass defense. I didn't look up, and I should have. Sorry, folks, if that was roughly near his high for the year, which I think it is. He may have had one game better than that, but just a disappointing year for Bolton. Tranquil had 9 combined tackles, but once again, they sat out late. With Chris Jones inactive, Tershawn Wharton, because of their lack of depth at defensive tackle, played 95% of the snaps. He had 3 tackles combined. He had 1 sack, 2 quarterback hits, but we're not chasing Tershawn Wharton, folks, okay? Shamari Connor was inactive, so at the safety position, Justin Reed, 84%, of which he only played 24% deep, did Justin Reed. Good news for him. Brian Cook played only 72% of the snaps, 78% deep. Jaden Hicks, 71% of the snaps. He played 64% deep. So we're not chasing Cook or Hicks as a result. Justin Reed is a free agent as a side note. It'd be interesting to see how they play things, particularly with Shamari Connor. I could see a situation where Connor takes over the Reed role and they get another cornerback to play the slot, because Connor is probably better off at safety than he is at cornerback, slot cornerback. Um, the cornerbacks, the only one I'm going to talk about here is Christian Roland Wallace. That's hyphenated, Roland Wallace, playing 67% of the snaps. He led the team with actually 10 combined tackles. 6 of those 10 were solo. 96% of his 67% were in the slot slash box. That's consistent for 2 weeks in a row. Unfortunately, he's not playing quite enough snaps. And probably if when Connor comes back, he'll be relegated back to the bench. But Roland Wallace is someone to keep an eyeball on your watch list to see how the whole cornerback situation shakes out and the safety situation for the Chiefs during the offseason. Michael Dana had 5 combined tackles, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss. We're not chasing Michael Dana, folks. We're not taking that chance in our championship weeks. Let's go to the Raiders. The Raiders played only 60 snaps on defense. Robert Spillane, 100% of them he played, and he led the team with 8 tackles. He got a sack as part of that and 2 tackles for loss, and he had a couple of pass defenses as well. The Saints offense was really bad in the second half, and as a result, the Raiders defense only played 60 snaps. Outside of Spillane and Trevin Moehrig, no one had more than 4 combined tackles. Divine Diablo played a season-low 53% for any of the games that he played. And of course, there's some games he didn't play where he had 0%, but when he did play 53%, a season-low. Kaylavon Chason from LSU played 80% of the snaps. He wasn't in the 90s like he had been the previous weeks, but he still got you a sack if you played him. Tyree Wilson, the number 1 draft pick from 2023, 67% of the snaps, half a sack this week. I told you, don't chase Isaiah Polamau, because last week he had those 11 combined tackles. I said, don't chase it. This week, 4 combined tackles. He did get 2 pass defense that helped a little bit out, but don't chase him. Thomas Harper had a half a sack and 1 interception as the number 3 safety for the Raiders. He only played 45% of the snaps. We're not chasing Thomas Harper, the undrafted free agent. Nice to see Nate Hobbs playing 80% of the snaps. Too injury prone for my liking. We can watch the Raider cornerback situation next year as well, but in my IDP drafts for next year for redraft, I'm not going to target Hobbs, just too freaking injury prone. Okay. Adam Butler, 77%. Jonah Laulu, 75%. What's interesting is some of the websites are getting Adam Butler and Matthew Butler of the Raiders confused. Matthew Butler has been inactive the past couple of weeks. Adam Butler is a 30-year-old out of Vanderbilt who's been productive for us, and he did have half a sack again this week. Adam Butler is the one that we're playing, but be careful if you see these inactive reports and you see Adam Butler on it. It could be a mistake when it's supposed to be Matthew Butler, because I did see that error on Sunday when I was catching up from checking on my in-laws and so forth later on Sunday evening, and I did see that as an issue. Okay, that kind of wraps up all our divisions in the conference. Remember to follow IDP Plus and me, Ricky Rodrigue, at RickyRod66 for more information of the off-season shows that I'm going to do. We talk about rookies and dynasty, and we're going to do some projections, and we're going to talk about top players at different positions and so forth. We're going to have a lot of good stuff for you all. I do want to thank everyone for your loyalty this year. Remember to subscribe to the channel, give it a like and a thumbs up, provide your feedback on this page. I will be trying to answer questions, but once again, it is New Year's Eve. And also, it may be a little bit later on Thursday before I get to it, but I will get to them. And then usually once I get past Thursday, then I'm not looking and I'm going to the Start Sit show for Sunday. With that, we're going to call it a wrap for this week, folks. Be kind to one another. Be safe. I do hope to see you on the Start Sit show on Sunday, and wishing everyone a fantastic Week 18, a fantastic fantasy football championship, and a happy new year filled with lots of happiness and safety and good health. Goodbye, everyone. See you Sunday.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.